Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text. When you first crack open a physiology text, it's super easy to fall into this trap of viewing the cell as a static map.
Oh, absolutely. Like you memorize the parts, you write down the resting voltage, and it feels like looking at a photograph.
Right. But the moment you step into the world of action potentials, that photograph completely shatters.
Yeah, suddenly you're dealing with this highly choreographed dynamic chain reaction. I mean, it is literally the electrical spark of human movement and consciousness.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to a special presentation from the Last Minute Lecture team. We designed this deep dive specifically for you, the student who is, staring down Chapter 6 of Cellular Physiology of Nerve and Muscle.
Fourth edition.
Fourth edition, exactly. And our mission today is to translate these incredibly dense cellular mechanisms into plain, accessible language. We're going straight through the chapter's exact order to build a solid causal chain.
Right, because every single step connects. We're going to see how basic cellular properties create membrane potentials and how those potentials lead to excitability.
And then how that excitability creates a traveling signal, the action potential, which eventually triggers stuff like muscle contraction.
So to set the stage for all of this, let's look at the opening context in the book. There's this great experimental setup described in Figure 6.1.
Oh, yeah, the patellar reflex one.
Exactly. The classic knee-jerk reflex. Imagine a doctor taps your knee with a rubber hammer. Researchers can take a microscopic glass electrode and slide it straight into the intracellular fluid of a sensory axon involved in that reflex.
Which basically acts like a tiny voltmeter, right?
Yes. It measures the electrical difference between the inside of the cell and the extracellular fluid outside. And when that nerve is just resting, the baseline voltage sits at about negative 70 millivolts.
Meaning the inside is negative relative to the outside?
Exactly.
But the moment the muscle stretches from the hammer tap, the membrane potential in that figure does this massive, sudden jump.
It's an explosive spike.
Yeah, that spike is the action potential. But what actually defines this event? The book lays out 6 golden rules of the action potential.
Right, the 6 core concepts. First off, it is triggered by depolarization. So the cell has to become less negative than that resting negative 70 millivolts.
Okay, that makes sense. And rule 2?
Rule 2 is it requires reaching a threshold. A tiny random bump in voltage won't do it. You usually need a solid 10 to 20 millivolt depolarization to actually trigger the spike.
Which brings us to the third property, and honestly my favorite one. It's an all or none event.
The textbook uses a really great analogy for this.
Yeah, it says triggering an action potential is exactly like firing a gun.
Right.
Like the speed of the bullet leaving the barrel doesn't change whether you pull the trigger softly or if you pull it forcefully.
Exactly. Once you cross that mechanical threshold, the gun fires completely.
And the nerve cell is the exact same way. Once it fires with full intensity.
Which leads to Rule 4, propagation without decrement. It travels down the axon without losing any string, moving at, relatively slow speeds compared to a copper wire, about 10 to 100 meters per second.
Still pretty fast for biology, though.
Oh, for sure. Then Rule 5 involves the shape of the spike itself. It has an overshoot and an undershoot.
Meaning it reverses sign.
Right. At the peak, the inside transiently becomes positive. That's the overshoot. And then when it crashes back down, it temporarily becomes even more negative than resting the undershoot.
Got it. And the final rule.
Rule 6 is the absolute refractory period. For about 1 millisecond after it fires, it is physically impossible for the cell to fire another action potential.
It's completely locked out.
Totally locked out.
Okay, so those rules paint a clear picture, but it naturally raises this driving question. If we have a nerve fiber running down to the leg, why do we even need this biological explosion?
What do you mean?
Well, if we just inject electrical current into the cell, why doesn't that signal just travel naturally down the axon like electricity in a wire?
Ah, I see. Well, figures 6.2 and 6.3 explain exactly why that doesn't work. The researchers set up an apparatus to inject charge at point A and measure it down the line at point B.
And what happens?
The signal completely dies. Biological cells are, quite frankly, spectacularly terrible electrical cables. The membrane is a super leaky insulator, and the internal fluid is a highly resistive conductor.
So it's like trying to force high-pressure water down a garden hose that's just riddled with holes.
Exactly. The injected electrical current decays rapidly because it just leaks right out across the membrane. Within just 1 or 2 millimeters, it loses like 95% of its strength.
Wow. So it would never even reach the muscle.
Not even close.
Yeah.
So to solve this massive decay problem, the cell has to actively change its permeability. It has to pull ions across the membrane to regenerate the signal along the way.
Which kicks us right back to the Goldman equation from chapter 5.
It really does. So at rest, the ratio of sodium permeability to potassium permeability, the PNA over PK, is just 0.02.
Because the cell is mostly permeable to potassium at rest.
Exactly, which keeps the resting potential near -70. But figure 6-4 shows this radical mathematical shift. If that ratio jumps 1,000-fold, from 0.02 up to 20...
The voltage undergoes this massive swing. It rockets all the way up to positive 50 millivolts, right near the sodium equilibrium.
Yes, and figure 6-5 shows the mechanism behind that explosive swing. The membrane is packed with voltage-dependent sodium channels.
Which are basically these microscopic trapdoors.
Right. When the membrane depolarizes, these channels open, positive sodium rushes in.
And that influx of positive charge causes more depolarization, right?
Which forces even more sodium channels to open nearby.
So it's this inherently explosive regenerative cycle.
Exactly. It's a runaway positive feedback loop.
Okay, wait, I have a logical pushback here.
Yeah.
If this cycle is so explosive, why doesn't every tiny random voltage bump in the cell set it off?
That's a great question.
Like, why do we need that 10 to 20 millivolt threshold we talked about earlier? Why isn't the cell just constantly seizing?
It's all about a battle of ion flow. Remember, at rest, potassium permeability is way higher than sodium's.
Right, because of the leak channels.
Yeah. So if a tiny random depolarization happens, the potassium flowing out of the cell easily overpowers the tiny amount of sodium leaking in.
Oh, I see. The potassium leaving is actively taking positive charge away, neutralizing the small sodium leak.
Exactly. So the threshold isn't just some arbitrary number. Threshold is the exact tipping point where the influx of sodium finally outpaces the efflux of potassium.
Any depolarization past that specific point creates a net inward current.
And then sodium dominates, and boom, the explosion happens.
Does that threshold change depending on the cell?
It does. It can vary wildly depending on how densely packed the sodium channels are. Like at the initial segment of the axon, the channels are packed super tightly, so it has a much lower threshold. It's like a hair trigger.
Okay, so we've hit the trigger. The cell has exploded to positive 50 millivolts. But what goes up must come down.
It has to.
Right. If the sodium keeps flooding in, the cell is stuck in a positive state. The muscle would stay locked in a contraction. How does it reset?
This is where we deconstruct the channels themselves. Figure 6-6 introduces the dual gate system of the sodium channel. It has 2 separate gates.
Okay, what are they?
The ease gate, which is the activation gate, it's super fast acting and swings open the second the cell depolarizes. But then there's the H gate, the inactivation gate.
And that one is slow.
Very slow. It actually receives the signal to close upon depolarization, but it drags its feet.
I picture this exactly like a bank vault. The initial depolarization hits, and the fast EAM gate swings wide open. Sodium rushes into the vault. But a millisecond later, the slow, heavy H gate finally responds and just slams shut.
Cutting off the sodium completely. That is called sodium channel inactivation.
But shutting the door doesn't get rid of the positive charge already inside the cell.
Right. So to actively drive the voltage back down, we look at figure 6-7, the voltage-sensitive potassium channel.
And that one only has one gate, right? The Dean gate?
Correct. It responds slowly to depolarization by opening, and it has absolutely no inactivation gate.
So if we look at the grand storyboard of this whole event in figure 6-8, we can trace the whole thing.
Let's walk through it.
So rising phase.
Yeah.
The fasten gates open, sodium floods in.
Then repolarization. At the peak, those slow X gates finally close, cutting off the sodium.
And simultaneously, the slow end gates on the potassium channels open up, flooding positive potassium out of the cell.
Crashing the voltage back down. And because those end gates are so slow, we go the undershoot.
Right. They stay open a bit too long, driving the voltage even closer to the pure potassium equilibrium before finally shutting.
Exactly. And this perfectly explains rule number 6, the absolute refractory period.
Because the H gates are firmly closed.
Yes. While those H gates are locked shut, no amount of depolarization can open the channel. You have to wait for them to slowly reset to their starting positions.
Wow. Okay, so we've built a single action potential at one microscopic spot. But how does it travel?
Figure 6 to 9 shows the mechanism of propagation. At the peak of the spike, you have this intense inward rush of positive sodium.
And those positive charges repel each other.
Yeah, they spread sideways inside the fluid of the axon, depolarizing the neighboring region until that region hits threshold.
The textbook has an amazing analogy for this. It's exactly like a lighted fuse. The heat from one segment of the fuse physically ignites the next segment.
That's a perfect way to visualize it, and it naturally travels in only one direction, orthodromic conduction.
Because the region it just left is temporarily dead.
Right, it's stuck in its absolute refractory period. The fire can only burn forward.
But wait, this brings back our speed problem. If the signal needs to be fast to be useful, like pulling your hand off a hot stove, how does biology speed this up when the membrane is so leaky?
Biology came up with 2 brilliant evolutionary strategies to stop that local current from leaking out. Strategy 1 is the invertebrate strategy.
Oh, like the squid.
Exactly. The squid just increases the diameter of the axon. It's like how a power company uses thick copper wires for high current cables. Giant squid axons can be up to 1 millimeter thick.
Because a wider tube offers less internal resistance, so the current can surge further before leaking out the sides.
Precisely. But vertebrates don't have the space for massive cables, so we use strategy 2, shown in figure 610. Myelin.
The insulation.
Yeah, specialized glial cells wrap the axon in a tight spiral of myelin, which heavily increases the membrane resistance. The signal can't leak out, so it leaps rapidly down the insulated tube until it hits an uninsulated gap.
The nodes of Ranvier.
Right, and that leaping process is called saltatory conduction.
The text also mentions a really crucial physics detail here about capacitance.
Oh, yes. This is vital. Because myelin is so thick, it physically separates the internal fluid from the external fluid by a much larger distance.
And because distance decreases capacitance, the membrane holds far less electrical charge.
Exactly, meaning you need way fewer sodium ions to change the local voltage. Less charge needed means the depolarization spreads incredibly fast.
It's just phenomenal engineering.
Yeah.
Honestly, I want to stop for a second and just peer under the hood.
Yeah.
We keep talking about these Eng and 8s like the little trap doors.
Yeah.
What do they actually look like under a microscope?
Well, figure 611 breaks down the actual molecular architecture. The sodium channel is one massive protein made of about 2,000 amino acids. And it folds itself into 4 distinct domains. Each of those domains threads in and out of the membrane exactly 6 times.
So those are the segments they label S1 through S6.
Exactly. And the geometry is beautiful. The 4 domains arrange themselves in a circle. The external loops between S5 and S6 physically fold down into the center.
To create the pore itself.
Right, the highly selective pore that only lets sodium through. But the crazy part is a voltage sensor.
That is a protein sense voltage.
It's all in the S4 segment. That specific segment is packed with positively charged amino acids, mostly arginine and lysine.
Oh, so when the inside of the cell depolarizes and becomes positive, those positive amino acids get physically repelled.
Yes. They get pushed outward, and that mechanical shift twists the whole channel open. If researchers mutate those charges away, the channel completely loses its voltage sensitivity.
That is mind-blowing. And what about the slow H gate? The inactivation plug.
That's just the intracellular loop connecting domains 3 and 4. When the channel opens, that loop slowly swings over and physically plugs the pore.
That's like a tethered ball.
Pretty much. And interestingly, potassium channels are built differently. They're encoded by smaller genes that just make one single domain.
Oh, so you need 4 separate protein subunits to float together and aggregate to build one potassium channel.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've built this entire gorgeous system out of sodium and potassium. But Chapter 6 throws us a huge curveball here.
The calcium curveball.
Right. It's not always sodium, is it?
Nope. Figure 612 introduces the paramecium. It's a single-celled protozoan that generates action potentials using positively charged calcium CanK2 plus 8 instead of sodium.
I love the pawn mutants mentioned here.
Oh, yeah.
Like, these mutated paramecia lack the calcium channels, so they can only swim forward, like a pawn on a chessboard. They can't reverse their cilia to back away from danger.
Which proves that this complex electrical signaling existed way before brains or muscles ever evolved.
But wait, human neurons use calcium too, right?
We do. Figure 613 shows human neurons with voltage-dependent calcium channels, but they inactivate way slower than sodium channels.
So on a graph, instead of a sharp spike, you get a prolonged plateau of depolarization.
Exactly. But calcium is more than just a charge carrier. Figures 614 and 615 show that it's a potent internal chemical signal.
It triggers the release of neurotransmitters at the synapse, right?
Yes. And crucially, it opens special calcium-activated potassium channels.
Wait, how are those different from the normal potassium channels?
Normal voltage-dependent ones create that brief 1 millisecond undershoot. But these calcium-activated ones stay open for as long as internal calcium is elevated.
Oh, wow. So they fled potassium out for way longer, creating this massive, prolonged after hyperpolarization.
Hundreds of times longer than a normal undershoot. The cell is deeply silenced.
So that long pause basically acts as a rhythm maker. It allows neurons to fire in timed bursts, separated by precise silent periods.
Which is how your nervous system paces your breathing and heart rate. Excitability creates the signal, and these specialized channels regulate it. Every step connects.
It really does. So as you close Chapter 6 today, we want to leave you with one final kind of mind-bending evolutionary thought.
Yeah, think about this.
The exact same molecular trick, a protein twisting open to let a calcium ion through, that a single-celled pond organism uses to back away from a chemical,
is the exact same mechanism your brain is using right now to pace its complex rhythms and process this very sentence.
Evolution doesn't reinvent the wheel, It just builds better wiring.
Beautifully said.
From all of us at the Last Minute Lecture team, thank you for diving deep into Chapter 6 with us. We wish you the absolute best of luck in mastering your cellular physiology studies.